In this next section, we're going to review the files inside of our feature module. One important concept to wrap your mind around is that features works two ways. First, we can export our configuration into code via the features interface, and in the end have a module that we can enable in order to install those components or update them. But we can also modify the code and have those make changes in the database. And as we've seen so far, there are some limitations to what we can change through the interface. For example, we can't roll back individual changes to components. We can only roll back an entire component group. But when we work in code, we can be far more specific, and we can even add components just like we can add them via the interface. Let's go ahead and begin by looking at the .info file. Now in a feature module, the .info file contains the basic information that most module info files contain, the core version that this is compatible with, the name of the module, and the package that it belongs to. Everything else here are sets of components that are going to be packaged into this feature, and it's just set up like a simple array. We have our dependencies, which aren't exactly components, but are selected in the same way when we build the feature, and then we have our components, and you see they're all built into the features array here. First, we have our list of fields that we added. We have our menu link, our content type, our vocabulary, and our user permissions. So this .info file actually contains all of the information that's needed in order to build our feature module. Let's go back to our module directory, and let's go ahead and open up the .module file. Now, as you can see, this file is very simple, and it almost always will be. It simply includes the articles.feature.inc file. So for any feature module, it's going to include the name of the feature, .features.inc. Now, even though this is a feature module, it works like any other module in that we can put whatever we want inside of this .module file, including hooks and our own custom code. So we can actually make a hybrid module where it's partial feature module, partial contributed module. And occasionally it makes a lot of sense to do this, especially when we need to link up versions of our feature module to versions of some custom code. However, if we decide to do this, it's important to be very cautious when we re-export our module, which we're going to do in a little bit, in order to update our feature. Otherwise, we'll lose our changes in the process. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at our articles.feature.inc file. It's right here. Now this file, along with our other .inc files that are inside of our feature module directory, include definitions for our components. So this function here is an implementation of node info, which contains information about a content type. So we have the article content type, we have the name here, the base, the description, has title, title label, and help. Now depending on how we configured our content type, this might look a little bit different. Now in our previous video, we modified the name of this content type to be post instead of article, and I just wanted to point out the differences between the actual code here and what you see in the diff as we compare our current version of our feature module to the version in the database. So I'm going to jump back to our site, and I'm going to make sure that we've gone to structure and then features, and then I'm going to click the overridden next to the articles feature, and I'm going to click on review overrides. And now if we look at these items down here where this name has changed to post, this has all of the same properties that we're looking at in our hook node info. So if we jump back to the code, we see there's a has title, description, name, and if we jump back over here, we'll see those same properties. But you can see that the code is actually in a different order. It goes from description to has title to name here, and then here it goes from name to description to has title. Also, when we look at the name, it's wrapped in a T function here, but when we look at the diff, we don't see that. Now, I only point out these discrepancies because sometimes you may find yourself copying some of the code here in order to find it inside of your feature module so you can modify a specific piece of it. But sometimes this code here isn't going to line up with the actual feature module code. So you might want to try a few different examples. So instead of searching for entire properties like name to article, we could instead search for particular values of properties like use articles for time-sensitive content. We could do a search for time-sensitive content and probably turn up what we're looking for. Okay, let's go back to our feature module directory. And so we've already looked at the module file, the info file, and the features.inc file. That leaves 4 additional include files, and they all line up with different component sets. So we have our field.inc file here, we have our menu links here, our taxonomy, and our user permission. And so as you might expect, as we open each one of these up, I'm going to open up the field.inc file, you'll see sets of properties for the components that we added within this component group. And they're all wrapped in implementations of hook functions. So here we see one of our fields listed, our comment, node, article, comment, body, and we see all of the settings for this field. If we scroll down, we'll see there's quite a few. And then we see our next field, node, article, body, and we scroll down, and here's our node, article, field image. And then finally, here's our node, article, field tags. So we have 4 different fields listed here. I'm going to jump back to our code, and I'm going to open up the menu links. Now remember, when we built our feature, we only added our one menu link, which was the article link that appears under the Add Content menu, and this simply contains all of the configuration around that. So sometimes it can be useful to look at the set of properties that get pulled into one of these components, so you know exactly what's being added to the feature module. Occasionally, for example, there might be an add-on module that you use that stores properties in a different way, and that might not actually get pulled into your feature module. So if you wanted to make sure, you could simply open up the include file that's connected up with the component group that you want to check. Okay, I'm going to jump back to the directory, and I'm going to open up the taxonomy.inc file. And here we have the property for our tags vocabulary. So you can see that all of these include files follow the same kind of construction. There's an implementation of a hook function that returns an array, and each item in the array lines up with one component, and each property in that array aligns with a configuration property for that component. I'm going to jump back to the directory, and finally I'm going to open up the user permission. And this file follows suit as well. You can see that we have each permission listed as an item in this permissions array, and then you can see, just like we mentioned before, that the roles are associated with the permissions in this file. So again, sometimes it seems like there's 2 different component sets that include some overlapping data, but that's usually not the case. So in this case, we had talked about permissions and roles, that logically it seems like both of them could contain information about which roles contain which permissions. But when we actually implement a feature module, we'll see that that role to permission information is actually stored in the permissions and not in the roles. And looking at the code can sometimes help you disambiguate that.